Brad Garlinghouse just got off stage at the XRP conference, and guys, I want to talk about what I thought was the most interesting thing that I took away from his speech. I'm sure the speech is going to be circulating all over social media, but I want to talk about something that I thought was super interesting and go into something that I don't think a lot of people truly understand in the XRP ecosystem. Now, Brad Garlinghouse was on stage and he reiterated a lot of points that I think are well known to most people in the XRP community. Two of the points that I think are well known, but I just want to make clear, he continues to reinforce the idea that XRP is at the center of everything Ripple does. It's so important to realize, and Brad Garlinghouse literally said this, that no one benefits more from XRP's price appreciation and XRP's success than Ripple. Ripple is the largest holder of XRP. XRP is the most important asset to Ripple, full stop. And it's so nice to hear Brad Garlinghouse continue to reinforce this idea. I think a lot of people sometimes miss the forest through the trees and oftentimes hyperanalyze whether this product Ripple is specifically putting out directly uses XRP or another product Ripple puts out is directly using XRP. Those things really don't matter. We are too early into the full adoption of this asset class. It's so important to understand that XRP is a new, novel asset that has never existed before in the financial system as it stands right now. What Ripple is doing is creating bridges to the XRP ledger, whether that's through custody, whether that's through Prime, whether that's through tokenization, whether that's through Treasury. What Ripple is doing is getting into the back-end systems of the largest financial institutions out there and bringing them to the XRP ledger. Brad Garlinghouse continues to make it extremely clear that XRP is the beating heart of Ripple's company, and I think we continue to see that reinforced in each one of these talks. He also talked briefly about Ripple's acquisitions. There is some potential shade thrown at Ripple that, oh, they're just focused on buying new companies. They're not focused on building out the XRP ecosystem. That is real building of the XRP ecosystem, right? Real building of the XRP ecosystem isn't necessarily another big meme coin, right? It's not the next big NFT. In my opinion, what Ripple looks at in terms of building the XRP ecosystem is taking over a prime brokerage and making XRP collateral for that prime brokerage. Taking over spot trading and moving settlement to the XRP ledger, or taking over custody and increasing the rails and potential of tokenization directly on-chain with XRP as that on-chain liquidity, right? These are things that don't just happen overnight, right? These are long-term strategic initiatives that are going to become the new rails in the plumbing of the financial system. Ripple understands that in order to do these things, you need to be building and integrating with real businesses. So it's so critical to realize Ripple can't just go to a Bank of America and say, hey, you should start using XRP. It's a lot more detailed than that. XRP has the potential to completely rewire the financial system as we know it, but what Ripple needs to do is integrate that into game-changing products. That's what they're doing with Treasury. That's what they're doing with custody. That's what they're doing with Prime. And in my opinion, that is the full-fledged vision for XRP as a brand new systemically important liquidity asset in the financial system. And those kinds of things take real businesses. They take real acquisitions. And I think it was just such a great thing for Brad Garlinghouse to address, talk about. Anyone who thinks that these things are somehow at odds with the XRP ecosystem, I don't know how you can build more important, bigger things than that. Now, with that said, I want to talk about what I thought was really important and really interesting, and that was when Brad Garlinghouse was specifically asked a question about, hey, why does Ripple buy back shares of the company and they don't buy back XRP? Now, I don't think Brad Garlinghouse answered the question to the XRP buyback side as much as I think a lot of people were looking for. And I'm going to talk about maybe why he didn't do that, but he did say some very interesting things about the Ripple share buyback that I think made a lot of sense. And it was interesting. As soon as he was asked about that XRP buyback versus Ripple share buyback, he instantly started talking about IPO. And guys, when you have a company as important, as systemically critical, as the plumbing of the financial system, it is so important that if you're going to go public, that you have good ownership over the outstanding share count. It's so important to realize that when you're a private company, Brad's in full control. Brad has as much control over the company that he needs in order to make sure that Ripple is moving in the correct strategic positioning and allowing XRP to be at the center of that universe. If Ripple was to go public, then essentially different companies could go acquire that share count and go take control over the decision making of Ripple, the company. One of the things that Ripple is going to have to be careful of is if they do want to go public, which I believe they definitely are going to want to in the future. I believe one of the things that they absolutely need to keep an eye on is that outstanding share count, right? They want to control as much percentage of the outstanding shares as possible so they don't have to worry about anything like a hostile takeover or anything like that. As soon as Brad started talking about Ripple potentially, or Ripple buying back shares on the open market, he instantly went back to that idea of an IPO. Now, he says that they're not in a rush to do an IPO, which is a good thing, right? A lot of people might hear that and be like, oh, I just want them to IPO, that'll be good for the price. We don't want Ripple to be in a rush to do an IPO, because typically a rush to do an IPO means you need money. Ripple's making it very clear, we don't need money, but talked to quite a few public companies and private companies in crypto, and one of the things that's made very clear to me is that companies want to go public in crypto to be able to show off and flaunt their financials. By being able to do this, it allows partners to look into these public statements and say, okay, we feel good about working with you now because we know these financials are legit and we know you're not going to disappear tomorrow in the next big crypto crash. So I do think Ripple is in a place where going public would be beneficial to their business because it would allow just a lot of partners to have even more long-term confidence in them, get a look at those publicly audited financials, and be confident that Ripple is a lot different than the rest of the cryptocurrency industry. Now, with that said, I want to go back to the XRP side of this because I think this is super interesting. Even though, right, Ripple probably has a strategic incentive in order to buy back their own shares for the potential of an IPO moving forward, why can't they also buy back XRP on the open market? Now, it's so important to understand this core concept, and this is critical to understand XRP Ledger. When the XRP Ledger was first created, there was a choice at hand, right? You either sacrifice the usability of the XRP Ledger to have a decentralized distribution event, or you sacrifice the decentralized distribution event to have a usable ledger. What the founders and creators of the XRP Ledger chose to do in the beginning of time was say, you know what, we don't want to create a copycat of Bitcoin. We want to create something that is actually useful. And the trade-off to having a hyper-useful, hyper-efficient, hyper-capable blockchain was to centralize the distribution. And that centralized distribution ultimately meant that Ripple was going to be the distributor of XRP. That does not mean the XRP Ledger is centralized, right? XRP Ledger is completely decentralized. But in order to get to where they needed to be, what they had to do was centralize the distribution of XRP, which means Ripple was going to strategically unload XRP to players that mattered. It wasn't Facebook giveaways and giving away XRP to everyone who wanted it, diluting the long-term value of it. No, it was strategically distributing XRP to players who mattered, so that when we all look back at the cryptocurrency industry 10 to 20 years from now, we can say that XRP is in the hands of the most important financial institutions on earth. This is part of Ripple's mission. It is part of why Ripple is a company, strategically distributing XRP. Even though I believe Ripple likely would love to repurchase XRP and hold as much XRP as possible, they can't necessarily do that because part of what they need to do as a company is distribute that XRP throughout the ecosystem. And it's just a fact of the way the XRP ledger works. Bitcoin traded off all functionality, everything that was critical to be the plumbing of a financial system, to have mining be the distribution mechanism for Bitcoin. The XRP ledger said, we're not going to waste a whole bunch of energy, a whole bunch of efficiency, a whole bunch of different potential use cases by implementing mining. Instead, we are going to have Ripple be the steward of the distribution of XRP, and that right there is the reason why I believe it would be counterproductive for Ripple to be purchasing XRP off the secondary market. What Ripple needs to do is to distribute the supply. And maybe once they get XRP under their ownership to a 10 to 20% number, right? I have no idea where they think that long-term number is going to be. Then maybe they start to strategically purchase XRP back. But in the stage right now that Ripple is in, it doesn't make sense for Ripple to be repurchasing XRP. Part of getting XRP to be the most decentralized and efficient blockchain out there is to decentralize the supply Ripple is holding. A lot of people might confuse that and say, are you saying that Ripple is centralized? Yes, Ripple is centralized. The XRP ledger, not centralized, but Ripple's holdings of XRP at the moment are fairly centralized. Guess what? That can change. Ripple can continue to distribute XRP, and we can look back and say XRP's supply is now as decentralized as the chain itself. The important thing to note here is Ripple is trending towards decentralization in terms of the XRP supply, and the XRP ledger is trending towards decentralization in terms of governance. These things are continuing to put the XRP ledger in a place where it is becoming maximum decentralized in terms of token supply and protocol layer consensus. Bitcoin, on the other hand, Ethereum, on the other hand, are trending in the other direction. They chose maximum decentralization in the early days, ultimately, though, choosing a network that encouraged and promoted centralization activities such as mining and staking. The XRP ledger did things very differently, but it's important to realize that some of the trade-offs in the early days, right, are not going to allow Ripple, I believe, at this stage, in order to repurchase XRP. They're more focused on repurchasing shares, keeping control of the company for a potential IPO, and making sure that they continue to distribute XRP to the financial institutions that matter, leading to a decentralized supply of XRP, getting every piece of criticism out in terms of centralization of XRP. They've already done it to the consensus layer. The XRP ledger itself, the protocol is decentralized. They need to finish decentralizing the actual XRP token supply. I believe they are going right on track to do that, but purchasing XRP isn't going to help. Guys, I hope you found that interesting. In my opinion, it was one of the most interesting parts of Brad Garlinghouse's speech. I think he gave a lot of hints towards an IPO likely in the future, and I think this entire thing really led back to the idea that when this is all said and done, Ripple has the potential to be the most important cryptocurrency company out there, and those roads ultimately, of course, lead to XRP. Guys, thank you so much. I'll be back for day 2 tomorrow. Talk to you later. For now, Mickle out.